Um, Let me start my slides really quickly. And then step 2, share my screen. Okay, there we go. I believe, can somebody give me a thumbs up that they're seeing my slides? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So I welcome you today. My name is Anna McKenzie. I'm the WWPEN Communications Manager, and I'm very happy to be spending the next 1.5 hours with you in our webinar, Unlocking Change, Transforming the Perception of Perpetrator Programs Through Strategic Communication. Today, I'll give you a brief welcome and introduction, then we'll go over to Alessandra, who will share with us why it matters how we communicate. Then I'll be back with some key components of strategic communications. Alessandra will give us some insights into storytelling, and as I mentioned before, we're going to do a little bit of a practical exercise here, so it would be great if you have at least a working microphone to work together in groups. And then we will close the webinar with a brief discussion and a closing. During that closing, we will share a link for an evaluation form with you. It would be wonderful if you could take the time to fill out that evaluation form. It's really good to have that information for our funders and for our quality assurance. Some short info, you're muted, and you're already being so kind by staying muted. We would ask you to stay muted during the presentation and share your questions in the chat, where we will gather them for the discussion at the end. During the discussion and closing, we have the comments and questions from the chat, but of course you're also welcome to, for example, raise your hand or indicate in any other way that you would like to unmute yourself and speak, and we will call on you. A bunch of people have already said that they will have to leave a bit earlier. Life happens, no worries. We will share the slides and the recording of the event and also any resources that we talk about after the event with you. And in case you hadn't noticed yet, this event is being recorded. So if you feel uncomfortable showing up on camera, we ask you to please turn off your camera. However, we usually do our best not to have people show up, faces show up in the recording that we put online. Okay. So, in case you don't know it yet, this webinar is being organized by the European Network for the Work with Perpetrators of Domestic Violence. And we are an organization that believes that men who use violence can and must change if we want to stop the global and devastating problem of intimate partner violence. Because if we do not learn how to work with abusive men in a way that ends their violence, they will continue victimizing survivors. Our organization exists to bring this work to countries across Europe and into European legislation in a way that ensures we are working with men who use violence, but always keeping survivors and their safety and well-being in focus. Our work directly improves the perpetrator programs offered locally and nationally by offering training and support to professionals, such as this webinar. And through our research and in conversations with politicians and donors, we advocate for perpetrator programs' rightful place in the fight against domestic violence. Additionally, we address root causes of intimate partner violence, such as gender stereotypes, through our communications and in our many projects. For some reason, it didn't work for a moment. Why do we do this work? We do this work to create a world where everybody can fully trust their partners and children live in safe and peaceful homes. That is our goal. With you today during this webinar are Alessandra Pams, our Executive Director, will introduce herself later shortly. Me, Anna McKenzie, I'm the WWP and Communications Director, Manager, and my wonderful colleague Doreen Mirza is with us on the keyboards during the tech support. Thank you so much for that, Doreen. And Alessandra, I believe, over to you. Muted. You're muted. You're muted.
That's not going to get me very far on communication. Welcome to all. Thank you, Anna, for that introduction, for that pitch. Kind of recognize it. Sounded great. So I'm the executive director of the European Network for the Work of Perpetrators of Domestic Violence, and we are here today talking about communication and why communication matters. So I want to start by telling you a little bit of what my story of the last year and a half around communication and my reflections have been. I started, I signed up for a strategic leadership course that was supported by our donors, the Oak Foundation. And when I signed up to this course, when I thought of strategic leadership, I thought of that I would be doing strategic thinking, visionary leadership, pitch talks, strategic decision making, and looking at change and leadership. And this course was also on these topics, but the core principle and focus of the whole course was on communication. And this sort of really started me reflecting on different aspects of our work and different ways in which we are involved in the things we do and how those things get to the people they need to get to. So, as I'm not sure what percentage of you work in perpetrator programs or are involved with perpetrator programs. Let's assume that most of you are involved in perpetrator programs or in other areas of the work of violence against women. You are probably engaged sort of daily in the work you do with knowing that you are engaged on social change, supporting victims of violence, or working with holding perpetrators accountable, so men's change, organizational change, or aspects regarding the organizations in which you work with, issues around funding, and issues around changing what doesn't work through lobbying. And if you sort of think about these different aspects of change, I list 5 different aspects of change. Each one of these aspects are deeply connected and need, in order to be carried forth, that we have a way of communicating with the people that we need to engage with. So if we're thinking about social change, obviously we need to think about who we want to change, what behavior they need to change, and aspects that Anna will be getting into more as we delve into the communication. However, social change is not going to happen if we are only within our organizations discussing what needs to be done. If we aren't able to promote this and discuss this outside and with other stakeholders, social change is not going to happen. As with men's change, men need to walk through our doors. So we need to have ways of communicating that we are there, what we're doing, why what we do can actually help people. That is crucial to actually having clients that walk in our door and being able to work with them in. Organizational change. Everything that our organization is going through, everything that happens, from like the most simple thing, we need to hire a new person to work in our staff. We need to let somebody out there know what we need, and we need to get these people engaged and involved, and we need to get the right people. So how that again is communicating to the outside in order to keep our organizational changes afloat. Funding, we need to be able to talk about our work. We need to be able to access subjects that will be interested. Oh, so we need to strategically communicate about that. And lobbying, if we need to change whatever is wrong with the legal system, again, we are going to need to communicate. So although we sometimes in our organization think as communication as something that comes afterwards, something that we kind of can delegate to maybe an intern or somebody, sometimes the last person to be hired is somebody that specifically should work on communications, and some service provider is doing that on top of all the other work that they have. While instead it should really be the other way around. Communication is kind of the pulsing heart of what we do. And unless we have a pulsing heart, the blood is not going to circulate in the body. It's not going to get where it has to be in order for the body to function and for our changes at the different levels to happen. Go to the following slide. In sort of understanding how important and how relevant communication is for our organization, we have to start reflecting on how we do it and with who we do it. And I like the quote from Alice in Wonderland when Alice asks the Cheshire cat, "Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?" And the cat answers, "That depends a great deal on where you want to get to." And Alice says, "I don't much care where," which I think is sometimes pretty much what we're doing with some of our communication. And the Cheshire cat answers, "Then it doesn't much matter which way you go." So I think that sometimes our communication is not informed enough, not integral enough to the work that we're doing. And collectively, and this is the reason for which we thought it would be really interesting to have this webinar and workshop together collectively. If we are able to align our narratives, to promote change in a coordinated way, to have a strategic thinking around the communications that we do, we can become extremely more powerful in creating change at all these different levels. Also because it is complicated to create effective and efficient communication. Also because, next slide, we are competing with a very, very low attention span among people are flooded with information. And we have a shorter attention span than goldfish. Goldfish have a 9-second attention span. And currently, after the pandemic, we have an 8-second attention span. So it's crucial that we become efficient, that we really have some common strategic planning, because there is a lot of change that needs to happen, that needs to be developed, and that needs to be hopefully mainstreamed so that we can arrive at sort of these common goals. Okay, I think I will pass it over to you, Anna, at this point.
Amazing. We're so good at time. This is so it is my pleasure to be talking to you about some of the key components of strategic communications. And I made this little overview of the puzzle pieces that make good communications planning. And that is asking yourselves a bunch of questions. What do I want to achieve? So, what is the objective that I want to reach? Who do I want to reach? Who's my audience for the communications? What do I want them to understand? So, what is my message? Where will I reach them? What is my communications channel? And then the very last thing to ask yourself is, so building on that, what am I going to do? What is my communications activity? So these are the puzzle pieces that we're going to be talking about. So the first question, as I mentioned, is what do I want to achieve? And I just want to stress this again. This is the very first question to ask yourself. It's not, we promised a newsletter, we need to write a newsletter, or I mean, just even saying, okay, we're going to write a newsletter because it sounds good, or we have a Facebook page, so we're going to post on Facebook or something. You start with the question, what do I want to achieve? And this question is informed by different levels of mission, goal, and objective. And at the very basic basis, you have your organization's mission. So let us assume, I don't know why I came up with this, it just came to me creatively, that your mission is that you want to stop men's violence against their partners. So this is the overall organizational mission that we're looking at. And this informs all of your organization's activities. Then on the next level, we have the different goals. So these can be more concrete. For example, that you want to reach all abusive men in your city with your program. Let's say you're the only organization that offers a perpetrator program in your city. So you want to be the program that these men reach to stop their violence, and you want to reach these men. So this is a long-term goal, it is a big goal, and it supports your mission of wanting to stop men's violence against their partners. And then at the very top, we're looking at the concrete objectives. And this is really the level of communications activities. So let's say your objective is we want to increase our number of male clients by 20% by the end of the year. So it is informed by your mission that you want to stop men's violence. It goes towards your goal of wanting to reach all abusive men in your city. But it has this wonderful thing that it is specific. This is a very specific objective. It is measurable. You want to increase the number of clients by 20%. It is attainable. I mean, it depends a little bit if you feel this is attainable or not, but you could also change it to 10%, for example, or 5% if that is more attainable. It is realistic in that sense, and it is time bound. So there's a timing, and that is that until the end of the year. So this is something really important about objectives, that they should be SMART objectives. I really like that acronym. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. And again, no worries, I will share the slides at the end of the after the webinar with you. So this is the first question, what do I want to achieve? And this question is answered by looking at your mission, your goals, and then developing specific objectives that are SMART and that you can build communications activities around. Who do I need to reach? This is the audience, asking about the audience. So in this case, you want to be as specific as possible. So for example, the objective that I wrote down is we want to increase our number of male clients by 20% by the end of the year. You could even be more specific about the saying we want to increase the number of male clients in the age group, let's say 30 to 45, for example, or 30 to 40 by X percent. And the more specific you are about your audience, the better you're going to know how you can reach them. We'll get into that a little bit later. So if you look at this objectives, there's different questions that you can ask yourself. So I mentioned above on the slide that sometimes we can't reach the audience directly that we need to reach. So from this objective that I have on the slide, you would say, okay, clearly we need to reach are the men. We want the men in our program. So that is our audience. However, we all know, deciding to seek help at a program can be quite a difficult long-term decision for men to take. So, and maybe you don't even know how to specifically reach that type of men. So you can ask yourselves, who are alternative audiences we could also reach to achieve this objective? So some audiences that come into mind here, for example, are worried family members. Or if you ask yourself the question, who are the decision makers in this process? And you look at men who are sent to your programs, for example, if there's a legal basis for that in your country, then the decision makers might be in the justice system. You might want to work with other different referral pathways. A little advertisement here. We have a wonderful project, the Engage project, that developed a guideline on how to train frontline workers to refer perpetrators to your programs. So that might be something that you want to implement. So depending on which audience you can reach, you might use them to reach the audience that you need to reach to fulfill your objective. I'm going to take a sip of water here. So the next question that we want to ask ourselves is, what do I want the audience to understand? And this is really quite interesting because it puts you in front of the question, when I develop a message, I tend to think from my point of view. However, you're speaking to people who might think completely different to you, who might have completely different values and beliefs as you. And if you want to reach that audience, you need to think from their point of view. So it's really crucial to put your audience first, not yourself, when you develop a message. Also, don't hesitate. You could also reach out to people who are part of the group of people that you want to reach and ask them what they think of what you're developing. So, I mean, you can also get some feedback on that. An additional question to ask yourself is, who is trusted? So if you have a certain message, like for example, you have a problem and this program can help you solve your problem, you can ask yourself, is there somebody that the men are more specifically going to believe and trust when they say you have a problem? And that might be an interesting messenger for your message. So let's say, for example, if you decided that you're going to do a communications campaign targeted at the audience of family members of men who are using violence, then that might be messengers that you think these men trust to hear from that they have a problem. So those are the messengers that you could use for your message. So again, our objective and the questions are, what is the message we need the audience to understand, and who would the audience trust? Then the question, the big question, where will I reach them? So I would like to stress at this point that as anything is communication and everything is communication, anything and everything can be a communications channel. So one thing to keep in mind, if you have certain communications channels, it's best to use what you have. You don't necessarily have to develop anything new, because there might be ways to use the channels that you already have. For example, do you have certain people in the justice system that you've already built relationships with? Do you have a regular meeting that offers you a space to talk about these topics? And do you have a conference coming up? I mean, it depends on who you're trying to reach, obviously, But using what you have a lot of times is really the best choice to make. Again, our objective and the questions that we could ask ourselves is, where could we reach the necessary audience, and what relevant communications channels do you already have? And a look again at our puzzle piece. So again, it comes together. First question, what is our objective? What are we trying to achieve? Informed by our organization's missions, the goals that are based on this mission, and then developing objectives informed by the mission and the goals. We want to keep them smart. We want to keep them, doable. Then the second question, who do I need to reach? Who is my audience? Then what do I want them to understand? What do I need them to understand to achieve my objective? And where will I reach this audience? And then based on all of these things, you can make an informed and strategic decision about what you're going to do. What is your communications activity? But there's always a but. The question that is missing is, did any of this work? Because when you plan something, the M in SMART is measurable, right? So you want to have a goal that you can actually evaluate after your activity, an objective, sorry. So a last step in this would be setting up an evaluation. So ask yourself the question, did what we wanted to do work? Around the objective, was it smart? Is it something that we can measure? Was it specific? Was it realistic? I mean, also a question around this is, as Alessandra mentioned before, a lot of organizations don't have anybody who has dedicated time to do communications. So if you plan this too large, it might not be attainable or realistic, So the question is, was my objective smart? Around the audience, a lot of times the problem is that we don't understand who we're talking to, that we weren't specific enough about the audience that we wanted to reach. Around the message, did we get the message right? Did we find the correct person to talk to the audience? Do they trust them? Is this something where we can make some changes, maybe find another way of talking about this topic, And then in the channel, the question is, did we choose the correct channel? Did our channel reach who we wanted or needed to reach? So these are some questions that you can use to evaluate if something worked or not. I mean, or to evaluate where you might have some parts that you could change. Yeah, I'm gonna do a really quick check of the chat. Okay, Jonathan left and looks forward to the slides and recording. I look forward to sending out the slides and recording. And that is it from my part, from my side, on the key components of strategic communication. So Alessandra, if you're ready, I'm handing over to you for the input on storytelling. You're mute.
So our next chapter, I think it's done. Next chapter of what we're going to be talking about is storytelling. Storytelling is a sort of a very popular concept now. We hear a lot about storytelling. Why is it that stories are so important in when we are trying to communicate and when we're trying to get messages across? Stories are really the way we are primed to learn for many reasons. I will be sharing some of the also scientific reasons for which we are naturally drawn to stories. It's a combination of biological, cognitive, and social factors that allow us to store information by storytelling. It is not by chance that we actually start training and educating children through telling them stories. And we still remember most of the stories that we were told as children, as opposed to most of the webinars, lessons, lectures that we listen to as adults, where maximum remember 3 aspects of what the presenter has told. And usually, if the presenter has told a story, we actually remember that story as one of the contents of the story. So it is crucial if we want to become more effective in building change, that we reflect on storytelling, on the stories that we can tell, on the critical issues linked to the stories that we can tell, on the ethical issues linked to the story we tell. So let's just start from why stories work so well, and then let's work our way into the issues around specific issues around perpetrator programs, perpetrator stories, and why we face some very relevant challenges within this field. So, next slide. Why do our brains respond so well to stories? There are many reasons for this. Partially, when we hear stories, our brains activate the same parts that we would be activating as if we were living that experience. That means that through listening to the story of something that happened to somebody else, we are able to gain experiences without having to suffer the consequences of this. And this is one of the historical and biological evolutionary reasons for which stories have survived. We have always told stories, and these stories would help people develop sort of the maps of what was safe and what had happened to people that strayed from the safe experiences. So we are able to simulate these experiences, the emotions, and kind of live vicariously through the stories and learn vicariously through the stories. So it has an extremely powerful heritage and is really relevant. We are emotionally engaged by stories. So stories evoke a wide range of emotions, from joy to excitement to fear. So we are captured when we are listening to stories because we are living these emotions and these experiences. We are emotionally invested in this. We want to know how does it end? What happens at the end of the story? Stories also help us to create a structure, to create a framework for organizing and making sense of information. In fact, whenever we have a puzzle, a story that starts with something that we don't know, when stories are built on that, we usually are really compelled and drawn into the story because we automatically want to make sense of the reality around us. And when we are shown that there's a missing link, which is also sort of the concept behind why we like puzzle words and different things that provide that kind of question mark and research of sense making. Stories also allow this, next slide, to encode in memory. It is a way that we memorize information, and we activate multiple areas of the brain, including those involved in language processing, sensory perception, and memory. And so this listening to stories enhanced our possibility to encode and retain information, which is the reason that of all the presentation that we've listened to, we often remember the story that was told, especially if it's a powerful story. stories are part of social connection. We are inherently social beings, and story have been a fundamental part of human communication for millennia. So it is the way we transmit our values, we share experiences, and we forge social bonds. So when we engage in stories, we often feel connected to the storyteller. It's like they sort of give us a part of themselves if they tell us a personal story, and it fosters a sense of community and belonging. It also, stories have a unique ability to capture and sustain attention. If you want to maintain your audience attention, if you tell them a story, they immediately, if I start, so let me tell you a story, and that immediately perks up your attention, and you follow through in a way that's quite different from structuring together concepts. So it's also a really powerful way of maintaining attention. So once we've sort of, we can, for me, you can take the slides off at this point. Okay. So once we've sort of focused on why storytelling works so much and so well, the next question is, what kind of stories can we use? What are the stories that we work with? What are the stories that can be powerful within our field? And as any of you that has worked in this field and also had some sort of interaction with journalists, you know that the first thing that they ask and are really keen to engage in is they want a perpetrator to tell his story, to tell how he was sort of redeemed through the program and how he changed and how terrible he was before and how great he is now and all the sort of details around that. And they will often ensure anonymity, and they will often offer all kinds of guarantees for protecting privacy of perpetrators. And it is sometimes a very powerful way of, although I have huge hesitations on when the images is like blackened and the voice is altered, because there is an othering that happens in that kind of storytelling that is quite unsettling. However, I think that we have serious ethical issues as perpetrator program in providing men to journalists or journalists to stories, for a series of reasons, some more linked to exposing men to social media. It can make men extremely vulnerable because the backlash on social media for any journal outlet that comes out could be really negative. But there is an ethical issue that I think is even more serious, and that has to do with whose story the story of being violent is about. And it is as much about the perpetrator as it is the victim's story. And I'm not sure that it's his to tell. By telling his story of how he has victimized somebody else, he is also depriving that person of a voice again. So I have very strong hesitations on the ethical implications of sharing men's stories, because I think that they are sharing stories about what they have done to somebody else, and I don't think somebody the other person has been giving a voice, a choice, a way of being represented, and maybe those are things that she doesn't want to share, I think that there's a high risk of re-victimization. So if we say that it's really complicated to tell perpetrator stories this way, obviously we can use stories that are mixed, narratives that are abstracted from individual stories, maybe stories that have been written, stories that have been already told, that are maybe recited by actors. But I think we also need to think and come up with different ways of telling stories. I lost my timer. How am I doing with time, Dordre?
We're okay for time, so you can go on for another 5, even 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. So if we need to shift to different kinds of stories and different ways of saying stories, then we really need to get creative. Because sort of the easy way is interviewing the perpetrator, telling that story. If we set that aside for ethical issues, for the risk of re-traumatization, then we need to really get creative and think of different ways. Different ways that can really be from sort of thinking of prevention work and reflecting with boys and men about what it means to be a boy or a man in current society and what those links are with violence. So we're not actually talking about stories that are victimizing anybody, but are more invitations to reflections and to different ways of thinking of this. Positive stories, maybe men that have chosen alternative routes to traditional masculinities. Also, just ways of telling what perpetrator work is. One of the ways that we have been experimenting with communication on working with perpetrators is the fire metaphor. So what you do when there's a fire. So the first thing that you do is you save the victims. The firemen, we call the fire engines. The firemen arrive and they save the victims. But then what do we have to do? We need to put out the fire. We need to eliminate the root cause that's creating the damage. Otherwise, the fire is just going to expand. It's going to destroy the field. It's going to destroy the houses next to that. And we think that working with perpetrators is like putting out the fire, working with the root causes of violence. This is a story. This is a way of telling the story of the work that we do in a way that is more powerful than just a lot of words that are stringed together, because that creates images in people's minds, and they're powerful metaphors that stick, and they stick differently. Another example is thinking of perpetrator programs. Let me tell you a story on that. So there's I've been telling the story in Italian, so now I'm missing the English word. Person that works with wood. And
now I'm missing the word too.
Oh, great.
Well, person who works with wood, cuts down trees.
We're going to go with that. So okay. Person that works wood is working on his boat on the on a river, and he sees a child that has fallen in the water and is yelling for help. So he dives into the water, he pulls the kid out, and just as he's getting to land, he sees another child that's coming down on the river. So he jumps back into the water, pulls the second child out, and then as he's catching his breath, he sees that more children are arriving. He says, I can't do this by myself. So he yells to the villagers and say, please come help. You have to come help me save the children. And all the villagers come and they start diving in, pulling out the children, diving in, pulling out the children. And they go on and on and on at this for hours. And after a while, the man that works with the wood gets out of the water and starts going away. And the villagers start saying, "Where are you going? You have to help us save the children." But then they just dive back in and the man walks off. And after a few hours, the villagers are exhausted. They've been in and out of the water, saving children all day. And then suddenly, the flux of children stops. The villagers are resting. They're finally catching their breath. They were able to save most of the children. And they see the man coming back. And they get angry at him. "Where were you when there were all the children to save? How come you left?" And the man says, "I went upstream to see why the children were falling into the river. And upstream I found a bridge. And the bridge had a hole that was very big and not very visible. And the children thought that they could jump over it. And they fell into this hole. So I asked some children to help me, and together we fixed the bridge, and the children stopped falling into the river." So that is sort of a story that tells about upstream solutions. And we believe that working with men, and we believe that working with perpetrator is working upstream on gender-based violence. So again, this is another way of sort of telling a story around perpetrator programs. There have been other ways that we have been experimenting with. For example, we shared in one of our last campaigns personal stories of service providers that were telling about their motivation, why they work with perpetrators. And we would like to sort of share with you the challenge of what stories we can tell and how we are going to develop a community of storytelling that are ethical, that are respectful of the victims of violence, but that enable us to be powerful communicators, that enable us to tell these stories, because these stories do need to be told. We have to find creative ways. We have to do better. So the idea is that you will divide in small groups of 5, since some people won't be able to answer and some people have left. So, I mean, you should have at least 3 people in your group that are actively involved. And you will devote like the first 5 minutes in your groups, either thinking individually of stories or working collectively on what kind of stories you could use. And then you will use the following 10 minutes to actually develop the story. So 5 to 7 minute discussion in the group to sort of share and brainstorm, and then another 7 to 10 minutes to try and elaborate and sketch it out. And then we will have 10 to 15 minutes for getting a bit of feedback, and hopefully this will provide us with collective ideas on what kind of stories we can tell, how to develop them, and how to move forward on this. Welcome back. I hope that you had you developed lots of interesting stories in your breakout rooms. We have a little time. It would really be nice to hear from all of the breakout rooms. If you could just tell us a little bit what you discussed, if you came up with any interesting stories, any questions, comments.
Go on, then I'll go for our group.
Great.
Hurrah for Lauren. Thank you.
I'll try and do it justice. So we do apologize, but we slightly stuck with the river and the boat theme just because I think it was stuck in our heads, so we kind of just sort of went with it in a different way. But we just sort of thought of it as sort of the perpetrator being on like a leaky boat and
Okay.
them sort of plugging up the gaps sort of in the wood and at the bottom with sort of like temporary fixes. We sort of spoke about they can be sort of potentially positive, but also sort of potentially negative things as well that kind of have short-term results, but maybe not that longer-term solution. And then sort of coming on to the perpetrator program would be, helping them, waterproof the boat, or, maybe even build a whole new boat if they're sort of at the point where they need to kind of, they're wanting to start from square one. Yeah, sorry, that it's not very dramatic.
Oh,
or
it's
read very well,
amazing.
but
No,
yeah.
it's a great story. It's a great story.
I just wanted to say that sounds like a story that could just go directly into a program as well. When you're talking about behaviors and tactics of trying to sort of regulate emotions or whatever. I mean, that sounds like such an amazing story that you can use also directly in your practice. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Did you have an easy time coming up with stories in your group? Was everything flowing, or were there any things that you were a little bit worried about?
I mean, personally, everyone else seemed to come up with some amazing ideas. I think mine were pretty poor, but I don't know. I don't know. We sort of, I mean, everyone came with an idea, so I guess it wasn't too difficult.
So do
But
you
yeah,
want to share some of the other ideas?
yeah, we can do. We had another one that was the idea of a child being like really scared at night and hearing lots of like weird noises in the house, like potentially like it's quite an old house, and not really knowing what's going on. They can't sleep, and the mum or dad is trying to sort of assure them that everything's going to be fine. There's no need to be frightened, but night after night, the child is getting more and more scared, and it just can't go to sleep, doesn't want to be in the bedroom. And then we sort of had the idea of breaking it down bit by bit, and fixing the creaky doors, fixing the window that's banging in the wind, whether there's leaky pipes and things, sort of going through and fixing all the little issues, the little things that are going on in the house, so that the child can then go to sleep, and kind of showing that it wasn't something too scary. It just needed a little bit of work here and there to fix the problem. And another one we had was a more positive one. We sort of were thinking about the idea of the image of like building a healthy relationships being like building your favorite plate of food, or like your favorite meal, like getting all the right ingredients together, trying lots of different combinations, making sure you've got the best quality ingredients, things like that. And just trying different things to get it right, to get that favorite meal sorted, as like a more upbeat and more positive one. So yeah.
Great stories. Amazing job. Really, really good. Thank you.
I'm writing them all down to steal them. That's what we're here for, right? We're exchanging. It's a marketplace of ideas.
Great.
Yeah, in our group, I hope I'll be able to put this across as it was by, I think it was Ida. Ours was around a plate, having a plate with how delicate it is and it breaking into pieces, and then having the choice to put it all together, to glue it all together. So that kind of perpetrator with all these issues, they have a choice to kind of get everything together, glue everything together, or just leave it as it is. And I think it was somebody, sorry, I'm forgetting names, I think it was Tiara, who kind of spoke to us about where she is working in terms of the perpetrators having that choice to be within the group. And initially, they don't take ownership or responsibility for their behavior. So they're coming to the group for the sake of coming. So in terms of that plate, are you putting it together for the sake of putting it together, or you have to put it together? And once it's been put together, what are you going to do to ensure that it stays together? I hope I've put that as clearly as it was put in the group. It wasn't mine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
talent. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna pop in and say that that was our group discussion, and I thought it was such great visual. I did craft a slight story and how we would say it if you want to hear it.
Sure, yes, of course.
I was the note taker, so it's not perfect, but we also wanted to highlight, I think Shara was saying this piece too, that we don't give men tools to know some of the ways to be healthy always. And when men come to us, sometimes they can feel really overwhelmed with the choices. So what we have is today was a long day. The pressure to be strong, to be tough, to be the rock, it's causing you to crack. You look down at the ground and there is the plate you broke in a fit of rage, exhaustion, and shame. Your family looks in horror, and you can feel the nasty thought creeping in. You are alone and you are bad. It seems like what is done, and the plate is broken, and so are other people's trust in you. But what if you could fix the plate? What if you had the tools and the skills to fix the plate? What if there's a place to guide you to pick up the pieces, work delicately to put it back together, to fix the damage and show how you can do better next time? The plate can be fixed, and but the shame can get in the way. You have a choice, and if you invest in learning with us, we can help you fix the plate for your whole family.
That's amazing. Great story. Really great stuff. Can you post it in the chat
For sure.
so that it become a resource for everybody? It's really, really good. Amazing.
Yeah, that was my great team. They had some really good ideas.
Great, great. Yeah. Do we have anybody else that is willing to share their stories, the group stories? These are tough stories to beat because they're just so good, but I mean, one has been better than the other, so maybe yours will be even better.
We
So-
have two groups that we haven't heard from, I believe. One is the group with Deidre, Jenna, Helena, Lori, and Olivier. And we also have Alice, Amanda, Caitlin, and Elena, whom we haven't heard from, I believe.
I haven't put my hand up because we didn't come up with a specific story. We ended up having a bit more of a broad conversation around like what would the components be that would be good in a story, and a bit of a chat about the ethical question that you raised, Alessandra, around the perpetrator story being the one that we share. Because one of the ideas was around if we could have a story from someone kind of 5 years on, like what would the positive life ramifications, having a kind of hopeful message, how could you kind of center that in a way that wasn't gonna take the story away from the person who'd experienced the abuse as well. And we chatted a bit about how useful statistics can be to kind of flesh out a story, but particularly if your intended audience is like a commissioner or a funding body rather than like social media, broader society. So yeah, we touched on lots of different bits, but didn't leave with a final story to share.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing the reflections. They're also interesting. So we have one group to go. Also, I mean, if you just have reflections, that's fine too. We're interested. We're reflective people.
Yeah, I think it was our group. We also did just a general reflection. I think what Olivier said was really good. It's that who was the perpetrator in the story that you've told with the river and the lumberjack? Because there was a hole, but like who was the actual perpetrator of the story? So we tried to go in the direction of understanding who did the hole, maybe who was the perpetrator, and what would be the alternatives to his actions. And actually, what came into my mind was when I was younger, I did a course on creating a comic. And how do you create a comic is you find then as an action, you have an action. And instead of doing that action, you find 10 alternatives and then you go with the 10th one. Because the actions get so much more ridiculous by the 10th one that it's gonna be comic or comical. And I find that this is also a way that's useful in storytelling, because you can say a story and then say, okay, let's try an alternative. And you can go and see how many alternatives can you create to the actual behavior of violence. Like, instead of, I don't know, breaking the plate, what else could have you done? And maybe it would have breaking something else, but at some point they have an idea that it's not going to be breaking anything, but maybe fixing something else. And I think, you know, creating stories that sort of make, maybe don't focus on the negative, but focus on fixing and arriving to a positive solution, could be stories to tell.
Yeah, I think we had a couple of really good examples. One was fixing the house, with all the squeaks in it. The other one was just about fixing the plate. Yeah, it was a great idea. Yeah.